Thank you all for being here. If I haven't seen you, happy 2023. My apologies again for Route 3. As Dean of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, I feel I have to accept responsibility for the state of New Jersey. So we shared Kathy and Christina's bio with you. I'm not going to repeat it. Frankly, if I went through all of their accomplishments, and Christina's a little scary because she's a good deal younger, fresh PhD of 2021, and her accomplishments would take almost as long as Kathy's. So we are really, really privileged and honored to have two such wonderful people here with us today. What I would rather do, rather than sort of go through their many accomplishments that you've seen in their bio, I just want to give the context again in 2 minutes and then turn it over to them. You may recall, you may have heard that we are engaged in a extensive process of master academic program planning, where we're meeting with all your chairs and sharing all sorts of data and cataloging high impact educational practices as part of an ongoing effort to think, how can we be stronger as a College of Humanities and Social Sciences and better prepared for a very, very rapidly changing a landscape of higher education, very different needs for students. But the background of this visit is that last year, Leslie Wilson, Jessica Brandt, and I were at a conference in Portland, and the keynote speaker was Kathy Davidson, who was on a video screen, but was incredibly dynamic and charismatic and provocative, even on video. And she came out and said some really incredibly important things, getting us to think about how higher education is changing, how teaching is changing, how students have different kinds of needs. And then she and Christina have a new book building on that original book, The New Education, which you know about. We had our reading group last year. And the critical thing I want to say is that Kathy and Christina are really playing a very constructive role in asking all of us in academia to engage in a conversation about how do we make our teaching more active, more engaged, and more relevant to today's student population. So on that note, I want to thank you again so much, and I will turn it over to you.
You all should have a note card. You should also have note cards and pencils. I think before I say another word, we're going to do a think, pair, share. We want you to just take 90 seconds, write on the card, and then this is something we do in all of our classes called think, pair, share. Write on what you like most about teaching. 90 seconds, and you'll be sharing this with somebody else. We'll be talking about it. What do you like most about teaching? And please, if you're at home on Zoom, what do you like most about teaching? You can put it in the, can they put it in the chat? Yes. Part 2 of think, pair, share, that's the think part. Pair, find somebody, ideally someone sitting next to you. If you have to be 3, that's okay. But if it's 2, what I like to do is have people take turns where one person reads on the card and then the other person reads on the card. There's several reasons that come out of the first book I did on this for the How We Know trilogy, which was called How Now You See It, which was based on neuroscience. We know, sociologists of education tell us things like 20% of college students graduate after 4 years in college without ever having spoken in a class unless they were directly asked a question. If you have cognitive issues or are a different kind of learning, being able to read off a card helps hugely, or even if you're introverted or have social anxiety, helps hugely. So this is something we do in all of our classrooms for access to make sure everybody speaks. And then I'll tell a third thing later afterwards. But for now, turn to somebody sitting next to you, one person read and the other person listen. Give yourself the pleasure of listening to somebody else and then repeat it. Again, 90 seconds, just read the sentence. Me. Can I have your attention, please? Me, can I have your attention, please? Excuse me. Excuse me, can I have your attention, please? You didn't break our record, but you came close. 7 times. That's a win. Anytime you can do something in a classroom where your students are so engaged with the ideas that you are irrelevant, think about that. That's a win, right? You don't agree? We'll talk about it later. Talk about it later. Sometimes we've only once done this at a university where they talked as loud as you did and as energetically. When we said, "Attention, please," they turned and faced us. We said, "Wow, this place has an obedience problem." And they said, "We do." Right? So the whole rest of the event turned into how you make leadership when people have been taught that the only people that count are the people at the front of the room. That's the think, the pair. I love to have people actually students formally listen to one another, because there's so many ideas in a classroom that never get heard, because the only thing that matters is the professor at the front and the final exam. We have experiments that go back to the 1890s, not 1990s, 1890s, Ebinger experiments about forgetting. We know that you forget about 75, this has been repeated so many times. You forget about 75% of what you learn within weeks after a major event, meaning a final exam. Right? But most of us are so worried about content. No, it's about thinking. It's about how you take the lessons you learn and learn to translate those. This think, pair, share, we try to do a version of it in every class, beginning and usually in the end of the class. That is a moment where they can synthesize. You can ask as complex or as cantankerous a question, but when students think about it, have that moment to just think to themselves and then share it. I think we're not going to do it today because of Route 3. Was that the route that was because of Route 3? But normally we would ask people in pairs to somehow synthesize whatever they wrote on the individual cards and share it with the class. Because that synthesis process, especially if there are contradictions, is where real learning and retention happen. Again, sociologists of education have done lots of work on that field. It has never failed me to do think, pair, share. Done this with 2nd graders. I learned it from a 2nd grade teacher. When I taught at Duke University, the president of our board was John Chambers, CEO of Cisco Corporation. He had me do it with his top 100 global CEOs. Bill Clinton was in the audience. That was fun. Right? He said, "Tell them a 2nd grade teacher told you how to do this, but don't tell them until after they've done it." Because nobody is more passive than a top performing CEO when John Chambers is in. Right? We're talking about trillions of dollars. Right? So the other reason you do these methods, and we'll be talking about them throughout this talk, is because you get more ideas, not just your ideas that comes back in the final exam, but you get more ideas, and ideas that never would get recognized without some method where everybody gets to contribute at once without knowing what the top dog is contributing, whether that's me or the class clown or the most brilliant person in the class, or that very unusual person, 3.5% of college graduates who are going to go on to be a PhD and replicate ourselves. 1% of Americans have PhDs. 25% of us have one parent who has it, or 2 parents who have a PhD. We're a system of self-replication. How do you break that system? That's basically what this is about.
Just to rewind for a moment now that our slides are up and just be like, we're so grateful to be here. Thank you so much to Dean Peter Kingstone. Thank you to Associate Dean Leslie Wilson, to Dr. AJ Kelton, to Joanne Caruso, and everyone who put this together, and for all of you for being here. And just a brief acknowledgement of particularly the scholars that we're indebted to in this work. Sandy Grand's Red Pedagogy, Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, and Max Laboyan's Pollution is Colonialism. And a special thanks to the Native Governance Center for its important advice on how to go beyond static land acknowledgements. And we've also donated to the Native Governance Center in honor of this. Do you want to talk about? I feel like you've already got this, but
Yeah. So of course, we have to have as an epigraph Audre Lorde, right? Learning is something you can cite, really incite like a riot. I think we need to explicate that. And then the next thing was what you've already done. What do you like most about teaching? And then the next one, if your syllabus looked at if your had your students just look at your syllabus, what would think from the syllabus was the thing you liked most about teaching? I have a feeling, and we're not going to ask that, but I have a feeling most of our students would think it was something quite different. Content, knowledge acquisition, getting your papers in on time, getting your finals in on time, the penalties if you do anything wrong, late papers, missing exam, missing an assignment, missing too many classes, plagiarism, right? Most of our, and then what do we say all the time about our students? They didn't read it. It's on the syllabus. Why don't they ever read the syllabus? They're not, most syllabi are not written to be read. They're like a terms of service agreement that specifically is designed to make you glaze over and not take in all the content. Should we mention Bettina Love at this point?
Sure, yeah.
We just something in the Transformative Learning in the Humanities program that Christina directs. They recently had a speaker named Bettina Love, who said something that we didn't, it's not in our book. It's amazing. She has a regular syllabus. She doesn't put any due dates in. She says, get out your calendars and come up with a due date. And that's your contract for the class. Let me know when your due date is, but that's your contract to the class. If you were in industry and you had 4 major or 5 major due dates at the same time, you'd think that was a crisis. And you would call everyone together and let people plan. Oh my God, we have 5 major things all at the same time. Let's try to move this here, and this team should take the lead on this one. Let's move this here, and this team should take the lead on this one. We leave that up to our students, right? We make a syllabus without any knowledge of what else they're going to be doing in their lives on that day. And then we penalize them if they don't make that happen. It's interesting to think about. I never thought about that before. Next time I teach, I'm going to try that method. It's a fascinating idea of giving students responsibility. It's contractual, right? They sign and say, I'm going to give it on this day. It's contractual. Allows her to plan out her whole semester too, and say, I'm going to get 3 exams papers this week and 2 this week, and she doesn't have 60 at once that she's reading.
So one of the things that we asked ourselves when we began working on this book together is, how do we create a higher ed that models the change we wish to see in the world? And part of that goes back to, right, this radical change, this riot that we want to incite in our classrooms where everyone is talking, overturning traditional models and following the research, following the active learning research that we have. So we boiled it down to 3 levels of transformation: changing ourselves first, changing our classrooms, and changing the world. And that's kind of what this talk is divided into, and that's how we divide up the book as well. So changing ourselves.
That's the hardest one, right? We've inherited a system that's roughly created in the 19th century. The American version is happening along with Frederick Winslow Taylor himself, right? Charles Eliot is president of Harvard for 40 years. He and his friends and his students are creating the modern university, specifically to get away from the old Harvard, which is training students to be ministers at a time when only 10% of Harvard students are going on to be ministers. So they create things like graduate school, divisions, departments, majors, the Carnegie Credit Hour. Eliot hires Morris, I've forgotten the name, a Philadelphia engineer, to invent a way of crediting student hours equivalent to what is happening on an assembly line. And who's the consultant on that? Literally, not a metaphor. We're not talking about the Taylorist universities metaphor. Frederick Winslow Taylor is the father of modern scientific labor management and labor learning, is the person who's inventing the Carnegie Credit Hour. At the same time, all these professional associations get invented. The Modern Language Association, the American Psychological Association, the American Historical Association. So you've got a system of policing, constantly reviewing a new system in place. Also, the first accreditation system gets invented in New England. Who's the first president? Charles Eliot. Ta-da. And guess what the standard is for every other university? Harvard. So you have a system that's an interlocking system of constant, not only peer review, but peer management based on the assembly line, which is certainly not the world our students are living in now. Oh, different world, different students, follow the research. This is a bibliography. You're welcome to take a picture of it, or we can distribute it later, of some key studies. The most important one to my mind is the Scott Freeman in 2014 in Public Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. It's a meta study of over 225 separate studies of all kinds of learning, traditional versus active and participatory learning, radical pedagogy, whatever you want, whatever term you use for active learning. The conclusion being, from looking a meta study of these carefully controlled scientific studies, is if this had been a pharmaceutical study, traditional learning would be taken off the market. They could find no measure by which traditional learning was superior. Traditional learning being lecture, or what I call the distributed lecture, which means I come in, I have a seminar, and I ask questions, and the same 3 students ask the same question that I want to hear the answer for each class. We also know from sociologists of education that the 3 students most likely to be raising their hand in the class, the ones most likely to share the characteristics of the professor. So in a white professorate, a middle-class professorate, in fields like computer science that are male-dominated, you're having a self-referential system of constantly reinforcing and replicating ourselves.
So in the interest of changing our classrooms, one of the things that we're really big advocates of is using pedagogies of care, putting care forward, putting literally care statements forward on our syllabi, so that the first thing students see and hear in our voice, that is the voice that makes the syllabus, right, are these like ways in which we care for their mental and physical health, their financial aid, connecting them with career services, right, thinking also about their futures, and putting that at the top. Adashima Oyo, who is pictured here on this slide, she wrote this beautiful post. You can find it on Haystack, where instead of saying like, it's in the syllabus, it's in the syllabus, it's in the syllabus, instead of putting the care on the last page about where to find the food pantry, where to find career services, health and wellness, putting that at the top so that students have access to those resources and realize the importance of them and the richness of what's available to them from the very beginning. And helping students also connect course content to crucial life skills and applicability beyond the class, which I know Kathy is going to talk about in a moment. Some things that we do too are use other models of like community rules or community statements, and talking about how we could model care for our students at the very beginning of the semester and coming up with some ground rules for how this is going to work. And Youssef Wagid, who's a professor in South Africa, uses this Ubuntu practice as a model, where it's about showing moral respect to all, considering all humans worthy of our acknowledgement and our engagement, and prioritizing that humanity and recognizing that no person should undermine or disrespect another. So this kind of thing where we put care first, it's, and you know, a student-centered way of assigning deadlines is one of the ways in which Bettina Love puts care first. These things like think, pair, share, right? Making sure that everyone speaks, right? That you don't go through college just speaking when you're called on, which can happen a lot. Another thing is an entry or exit ticket, where at the beginning of class, you are asked to respond to something, or at the end of class as an exit ticket, you're asked to respond to something. When something doesn't go well, an exit ticket is an amazing way to say, what went wrong today? What could we do for next week to make the next class better? What do you think? And there are some other ideas here, and we can go into, I'm also happy to talk about any of these in the Q&A, but we're gonna do one of these in a moment on interviews and this listening dyad. So if you're in person or, if you're online, type in the chat and you can read one another's posts on the chat and also respond in the chat. But in person, same groups you were in before, ask the person next to you, what's one thing you will do this semester to put care forward? And the trick is that when you ask this, then you have to listen. And this is what makes a listening dyad work. No interruptions, not even to agree, right? You have to practice that good listening skill of like maybe nodding, but not verbally interrupting. And then you take turns, right? So that the speaker who had a chance to speak realizes how long they've been talking. And then the listener gets a chance to speak and the speaker gets the opportunity to be a listener. And this is a great activity to do at the beginning of class with students, to just talk about what it is to be a volunteer, to step up and speak, and also to realize like, all right, I've spoken, let me step back and listen and see the big picture and give my peers a chance to speak. So take just a couple minutes to answer the question, what's one thing you will do this semester to put care forward?
And we're gonna do 1 minute and then
Yeah.
switch and do a second.
I'll set a timer.
Think you're alone. What are you gonna do next semester to put care first? That's fantastic. Thank you. I will do that. Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, time's up. Switch if you haven't switched yet. Switch turns.
About the liquid syllabus.
No.
Quickly mention the woman I want to talk to, sitting by yourself and she gave me something amazing. I don't know what to do. Wait a minute. Yeah. How you?
We're gonna tell you now. We'll tell you some point. I'm so excited that you're talking to each other. We're coming back. We're coming back. I know. I know.
Okay, well,
All right.
clap once if
All
you hear
right.
me. Clap twice if you hear me. Works every time. I know. I don't like to do that though. I love it when you talk. There was a woman who didn't have a partner, so I went and did a listening dyad with her and learned about the liquid syllabus. I don't know that. This is why you do it. You learn things you didn't know before. Can you tell us quickly what a liquid syllabus is, or am I putting you on the spot? Thank you very much. I don't know it. I look forward to learning it. And that's what an inventory method is for, is you learn things and your students learn things. Suddenly, the knowledge base isn't one person, but everybody in the room.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think using Google Docs or like some kind of digital document that is editable is a huge step for students. I feel like when we print them out, then it really does feel like a contract that is static, that cannot be moved, right? And so I often use a Google Doc or something that everyone has access to, that everyone can change. And there's some trust there, because if someone messes it up, we have to go back to an older version. And that's happened. But that's why Google is great, because you can go back to an older version and see what it was before. And that way students really feel that this is something that I can comment on, that I can engage with and do something with.
You know, yet another, I don't know if Montclair is facing the so-called demographic cliff that the rest of America is. Sociologists of education tell us the number one reason students don't go to college is financial. Carl Becker did a survey at Georgia State of his students and found out they were 6 times more likely to drop out of college for financial than educational reasons. But the number 2 reason, that one we can't, you know, there's certain things we can do with. The number 2 reason is students don't know why they're in college. Yes. So one thing that inventory methods do is say, we're in college so that you can learn how to think, to say things, to control your life. The great science fiction writer Samuel Delany says, every time you raise your hand or every time you don't answer a question, you're learning how to take it. You're learning how to not ask for a raise, learning how to be passive. You're learning how to bow to authority. You're being trained. That's why the system was made, why public mandatory education is made in the 19th century, to train people how to go from farmers to being factory workers, right? That is the system. It's a way of saying, no, you have something to contribute and that will last you the rest of your life. Will that solve the demographic cliff? No, but it might encourage more students to be in college in an atmosphere where everything is trying to tell students right now that college isn't worth it.
Okay, 1 second. There you go.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Ungrading. Anyone in here practice some of the ungrading methods? Any of you involved in this? Okay. This is a huge movement. I think we were all surprised to find out how many people are interested in ungrading. Needless to say, unless you're at Reed or at Hampshire or at a very few colleges or medical school, most medical schools, you're graded. So you have to put a grade sometime. But what about the ways to give formative feedback until that final grade has to be put on? We know from sociologists of education that if you put a grade on the paper, students are not going to read the other comments. Very unlikely to read the comments. Without the grade, students read the comments or are more likely to read the comments. I'm going to talk about a few methods of ungrading that are things we can do that are not radical in the most extreme ways, but really practical and inspiring things that we can do to help our students. This one comes from Carl Wyman. I was lucky enough to share the stage with him at the Nobel Prize Future of Learning conference. He was the 2011 Nobel laureate in physics. It always helps to have a Nobel laureate in physics who likes the same things about education that you do. And he does a flipped classroom, but then he adds something really, really interesting. A flipped classroom, of course, his students are reading the physics assignment beforehand. They come into class and he gives them a problem. He doesn't lecture. They answer the problem and he puts on the screen all of their answers. 54% gave one answer, 36 said another answer, et cetera, et cetera. And then he has them, he doesn't say which is right. He has them work in groups to try to understand the thinking behind the answers. And then he asks them again. And he asks them again until everybody ends up with the right answer. When he gives the second assignment, the next assignment, he gives students an incredibly important tool. I was just in Puerto Rico and somebody said, I'm in college, but my brothers have ADHD and I'm afraid they'll never go to college. Can you give me some hints for them to learn? This is a fantastic method that Wyman uses if you have any kind of learning disabilities. I happen to be dyslexic. I love this method. Before he gives people a new assignment, he teaches at Stanford now. He taught at Colorado, University of British Columbia. Now he's at Stanford. I guess when you win a Nobel Prize, you get a job at Stanford. I'm not sure. He has students think, is that me? No, it's not you. We all have the same one. Yeah. He asks his students to think about how they did on the first question. Did they get it right the first time? Why? He has them discursively write in a form that they send him why they think they got it right. If they got it wrong, what convinced them that it was wrong and what changed their mind? So they write a little essay analyzing their own thought process Once he gets that essay, he then sends them the next week's assignment and the next week's puzzle, which is a much harder puzzle. That's incredible. Often do students get that opportunity to really not just get comments, but think for themselves about how they learned, right? It's an incredible, incredible tool. I'm gonna
Yeah,
let you do
no,
it.
no,
I'm
no.
gonna screw it up.
Oh
No,
yeah.
there was one other one, I think.
Yep. We skipped over. There you go.
A similar one is one from Sarah Schendel, who teaches a law professor at Suffolk University. What she does is she gives a standard law exam, and then there are 2 questions at the end that she doesn't grade them, but they're mandatory. The first one, students have to write down, because we're so good at lying to ourselves. They have to write down how much time they spent preparing for the exam. And they also write down what grade they think they've earned. When she hands back the exam, the first thing she has people do is go to that last page. Again, it's not graded, and just think to themselves, hey, I spent 15 minutes and I got an A+. Home easy the rest of the course. Or I spent 15 minutes and I got a D, right? Then maybe there's something we should change. Well, again, sociology of education have studied this. We're terrible at remembering what we did to achieve what we did. So this is another tool you're giving students. You don't have to require it. You can tell them to do this for themselves, but write it down, because you will lie to yourself if you don't write. We've got lots of tests on that. I used to teach with Dan Ariely, the person who does all of those cognitive tricks and things, and he had really good ones. But being able to lie to ourselves is one of our best human talents, especially when we're afraid of being judged.
Okay. So a lot of people have been talking about ChatGPT, so we thought that we would also talk about academic integrity, and that it's really not about the fine print, right? But about teaching the meaning of integrity and credibility and authenticity. And we have an example, an amazing example from Dean Ann Balsamo. But I really like what John Warner has said, that it poses an opportunity to re-examine our practices and make sure how and what we teach is in line with our purported pedagogical values. So for me, like, I am so eager to give students an assignment that directly engages with that software, right? Because if it's not ChatGPT, it's going to be something else. And Kathy and I had ample time to talk in the car about Wikipedia and how, like, we've both assigned things where students actually become like really well-versed Wikipedians and add to Wikipedia important citations and articles and knowledge, particularly because the majority of Wikipedians, like more than 80%, are white male authors of Wikipedia articles writing about white male articles. And so getting students involved in projects like Black Lunch Table and Art Plus Feminism to try to diversify Wikipedia to actually be representative of our diverse society is a really important way to get students engaged in what is good research. How do we cite, and that was what we were worried about at one point, and now it's ChatGPT. So how can we engage them in that kind of a software and or AI, and do assignments that show this is the value, the tremendous value of humanistic research and writing, right? And to show them the difference between AI and humanistic writing and research.
If I were teaching chat this semester, I teach teachers, but I'm not teaching undergraduates. I would love to have them pick a topic and have everybody have ChatGPT write an essay, and then compare the essays and figure out what in their prompt encouraged a certain ideological response. What in their prompt caused the world of the question to be circumscribed in a certain way. And what did the ChatGPT bot leave out? And why did they leave it out? Citations are even the chat. I've got a friend of mine is working on ChatGPT 5. And he said they know that the citations are wrong because citations are just word count citations, right? So they're often weird, not anything that anybody would recognize as the major people in a field. He also says, by the way, that they're trying to watermark ChatGPT, not to save us from plagiarism, but one, for copyright reasons. They want to make money off it. And two, AI bots don't learn from AI writing. They only learn how to get better from human writing. And unless there's a way to distinguish bot writing from human writing, they're going to just make the same kind of AI mistakes over and over again. There was also a law professor, you probably read about this term, who had ChatGPT answer all of the essay questions for the law students. And then they were graded by humans, not knowing which one was it. I don't even know if they knew there was a ChatGPT in there. They were all like the bottom students in the class. So a lot of the panic about ChatGPT is people who are so afraid that something that they think is the right way of teaching is now going to be undermined. When that method should have been undermined long ago. We shouldn't have needed ChatGPT. Wikipedia at least should have helped undermine a certain kind of regurgitative form of learning.
Do you want to talk about Amber, or do you want
Is that me?
Either way. So one of the things that I really love about this syllabus from a course that Anne Balsamo taught on technoculture is that instead of just having a typical plagiarism statement, and up until I saw this, that was all I had on my syllabus. She does a thing where on her syllabus mirroring that is a statement about the importance of not just being honest, but also having a reputation for being credible, having like, what is credibility, and really educating students on that. Like you could give a writing prompt about like, you know, how do you feel when a friend is lying? Like, how do you develop trust with a friend or someone in your life to establish that they are credible, that they are trustworthy, right? And then that brings out that feeling of like, well, I want to be a trustworthy person. And so trying to bring that out of students and showing them that this is not just about penalizations for cutting corners, but like a real way of talking through, like, instead, come to me, right? And let's talk about how to do this in a credible, honest way. Oh, and this is me too. All of these things, getting everyone in the room to talk, getting 100% participation, what the American Psychological Association calls total participation, is a form of a democratic and anti-racist pedagogy where the same three people aren't raising their hands all of the time, but we're getting input from everyone. One way to do this, this comes from the feminist movement, is to give everyone 2 popsicle sticks. And there are many other ways, but in this one, you get 2 turns to speak. And so you have to think carefully about using a popsicle stick or keeping it to be able to say something. And if you burn 2 popsicle sticks, that's it for you for the rest of the class. You have to think carefully about it. But if you only have 45 minutes left, turns into 15 minutes really fast, and you haven't used a popsicle stick, maybe your name is on it and that's your credit for being there today. And so you really need to step up and use that popsicle stick in some way. So that's one way in which you can kind of democratize participation and help people just to be aware of, am I stepping up? Am I volunteering too much and talking too much? Or is now a time to listen? Or maybe the vice versa, trying on a different role for size. Another, and I really want to hear more about the liquid syllabus. Another way to democratize things a bit is to think about a syllabus that is flexible for students, that gives them options, that gives them choice. Bettina Love's example about deadlines is a great one. One thing that I do is I teach mostly in English departments, so literature, writing, and the like. I give students a choice between bi-weekly reading reflections or a midterm paper. And this arose from a situation in which students were voting on additions to the syllabus as well as course policies. And there was one student who we were trying to decide whether we would all as a class do a midterm or all as a class do bi-weekly reading reflections. And everyone was going for the bi-weekly reading reflections. They were like, low stakes writing, yes, please. I don't want a high stakes midterm, no, thank you. Majority was going in that direction. One student was like, I don't know about you all, but I cannot keep track of 6 different deadlines. That is a nightmare for me as a person. I would much rather have 1 deadline and 1 midterm. No one spoke up at the time. And it was one of those situations where you stay up all night thinking about that one student in your class. And I felt like I had failed this student. And I came back and I was like, you know what? Majority voting is out. Let's go by consensus and let's find another way. And gave every student the option to choose for themselves. And even though no one else spoke up that day that one student dissented, about 25% of the class ended up taking that path. So it was valuable to a lot more students than the one who spoke up. And there have been many situations in majority voting where maybe that point wouldn't have even been brought up. So giving those or options, looking in your syllabus and finding a way to give students more paths can be a way to cater to every learner. And that's another way of practicing a democratic anti-racist pedagogy and critiquing majority rules in democracy also.
Learning outcomes. There's a wonderful organization called the National Association of Colleges and Employers that have interviewed over 3,000 different employers about what they really look for in an employee. Their results are almost identical to ones that Google did in 2014 and then replicated in 2015, looking at who at Google actually advanced. Google's particularly interesting because at that point, they refused to hire anyone who was a business major, social scientists, humanists, artists. Their policy was only engineers and computer scientists, and they were a data-driven company. When they looked at their own data, they discovered, lo and behold, technology skills were not even in the top 7 of things that made people rise through the hierarchy of Google. It was things like, and it was almost identical to this list, what NACES found from looking at 3,000 different employers: critical thinking and problem solving, teamwork and collaboration, professionalism and work ethic, oral and written communication skills, technological and basic, statistics. How do you tell what a good statistic from a bad is? Excel spreadsheets, simple statistics, nothing fancy, not even remedial math level fancy, basic practical quantificational literacy skills, and intercultural and global fluency. Well, if higher education doesn't train you for that, then we really are missing the boat, right? There's been so much rhetoric about how higher education doesn't prepare you for the job market. 3,000 employers are saying otherwise, right? But most of us don't do that bit of translating what we're doing on our syllabus, all those deadlines, all those page numbers, all that content, to these kinds of skills. We're great at doing it in our mission statements, but rarely do we do it in our syllabus, and our students don't know. There have been many surveys of students. Why did you learn anything in college? No. 45% of students say no. They don't use anything they learned in college in their first job, right? They don't know because we rarely know, right? If you ask most of us, what do we do in our classrooms? It's content learning without the translation of all those other so-called soft skills or higher order thinking skills that actually come from the project of mastering content some way. Our colleague Shiro Witanachi, who teaches applied statistics. Now that sounds practical, right? At Queens College, she's an economist, actually says it isn't practical. She teaches Bayesian statistics. Her students, when they go out in the job market, have no idea why Bayesian statistics was relevant to their jobs. So even in her class, what she does is she takes the NACE skills and she actually shows students how the individual, there's another column that got misplaced by her lovely picture, takes the assignment, talks about the learning outcomes, and then talks about the career readiness outcomes that directly come from these lessons in Bayesian statistics or whatever else she's teaching in the class, right? I have not found any class, and I often do this in workshops, that can't be translated into those skills, the NACE skills. But we ourselves rarely don't do the translation, and we don't help our students with that translation. I like to actually have students put on their resume that, yes, they've done collaborative projects and taken from an idea into implementation, right? Look at Google introductory resume. That's a thing, right? Your English majors, your art history majors, your French majors have that thing that they can put on their resume, no matter what job they're looking for in their first job. Changing the world. What do we say in our mission statements? Right? Our mission statements are pretty lofty. Rarely are our syllabi lofty. I go back 5 years and look at my syllabi. And I've been doing this kind of research and stuff for a long time, but even 5 years ago, I'm like, whoa, that's kind of dry. That's not lofty. I'm not telling my students we can aspire higher. How can I change that? How can I make sure my students know that there's something priceless that they're learning? We've got the stats about how much their income changes. We also have the stats about what correlates with a full-time job that somebody thinks is meaningful work. Health, satisfying relationships, even longevity, right? We've got those. One of my provosts in the past used to say, the tragedy is it really is healthy, wealthy, and wise. The longevity rates, the education rates do correspond also to how much education you have. 3-minute manifesto, something you.
Either one.
Okay. 3-minute manifesto is something that Bruce Mao, the great designer, challenges people, which is write down what you want to do with the rest of your life. And he says, people know the future they want, they just haven't been asked. He doesn't mean I want to have a job as a junior partner in a law firm. He means, do you want to make money? Do you want to have a family? Do you want personal happiness? Do you want to make art the rest of your life? Do you want to be inside at a job or outside? Do you like to sit at a job or do you like to wander around? Do you like to be your own boss? Do you like having somebody else boss you around? Do you like to make your own schedule? Or no? I want to know 9 to 5 and then the rest of the time is my own. These are about how you live your life. Whoever asks you those questions, but most of us know down deep. I mean, I think part of the great resignation that's happening worldwide, it turns out, is because people had 2 years to think about what they really want. And they found out they really didn't want what they were doing. Giving your students that opportunity to write a 3-minute manifesto, a mission statement. What do I want out of my life?
Can I add one thing?
Yes.
Yes, one of the things that Kathy and I have both done at the beginning of a course is ask students in an entry ticket on the very first day, how is this course going to change your life? What one thing could you learn in this course that you could take with you for the rest of your life? And the students are kind of like, they're like, nah, no, I'm like, this must be a joke. And I'm like, I'm serious. I want you to learn one thing, at least in this course, that you will take with you for the rest of your life. And if that means changing the course, then we'll change the course. Like, let's find a way. And then they're like, okay. And I give them like 5 minutes to like really begin to kind of peel back the layers and get to what is it that I could learn in this course and focus on that's meaningful to me. And the problem is, as Bruce now says, that they haven't been asked that question, right? Maybe because we're tired, maybe a little bit jaded, maybe like the criticism that comes with scholarship can sometimes be a little bit overbearing. And it's so important. And one of the things that really sustained us in writing this book together and through the pandemic was this idea of choosing to be optimistic. Just every day getting together on Zoom, or not every day, but every Tuesday and Thursday for 2 hours, getting on Zoom and writing this book together and choosing optimism when the world was literally on fire. There were protests happening everywhere and just like so many things, you just were afraid to check the news, right? That choosing optimism, believing that maybe my course could have something in it that you'll take with you for the rest of your life. Maybe. Let's just think about that together and see if we can make it happen. It's that kind of thing. When one of our amazing colleagues, Shelley Eversley, has done this manifesto activity with her students, they say, I want to make my mom proud. And then a bunch of other students are like, I want to make my mom proud. Yeah, like, let's do that. Like, what could I do in this class that would make my mom proud of me? Connecting them to that feeling. And that really feels like change is afoot, change is happening, that riot that happens in the classroom that we want to incite. So
I hate to be a
yeah, sorry.
We actually have to be out of this room.
Okay.
20.
Well,
so,
this is the last.
Yeah, apologize.
No
No worries.
last slide.
Okay.
The
Sorry.
great literary critic, Farrah Griffin, at the height of the pandemic, when we still didn't have vaccines, we didn't know a cure, we were still washing packages. Remember that moment where we were washing off paper packages? She wrote a wonderful piece in the Boston Review where she asked four questions. What one book would you, from class, would you like to take with you? What, if anything, from your old life do you want to leave behind? What do you appreciate that you would like to take with you? What change, if any, would you like to see and commit to bring about on the other side? And I can't think of too many better questions than that to ask our students.
That's it.
So what question would you like to ask today? But we have to be out of the room at 5:20. And there's electric lines down on whatever that road is. And there's nobody on the street. And we had to go to Newark to come here from Manhattan.
You can also ask us on Twitter. We respond.
Yes, we actually love to be asked on Twitter because then everybody gets to learn.
Yeah.
Right.
So we wanted to do with the Q&A, we wanted to, first of all, thank you very much. Let's a round of applause for Kathy and Christina. What a great presentation. Thank you for sharing. We're going to move into the Q&A, and they want questions from both online and those in the audience. And I'm obviously getting some feedback. Hang on. There we go. Those attending on site, just raise your hand. Leslie on one side and Minye on the other side have a mic that they'll bring out to everybody. And for those who are online, just post your question into the chat and I will read some of the selected ones with the time we have. Do we want to start? Questions? People are taking the time to write.
Like, there's some feedback in the sound.
For at least 4 or 5 years now, I begin every class with a discussion group where I ask questions about critical thinking versus assimilation bias. And I've had 700-800 students, and the majority of my students say people are generally not capable of critical thinking because when it tells them something they don't want to learn or they don't want to see, and they also despair of the future because they think most people are not willing to compromise and lay down their ego. In other words, my students have a very pessimistic view, and I've done this hundreds of students about the possibilities of even critical thinking. And the majority of my students do not think critical thinking is functionally possible because people will not put their egos, special interests, and agendas aside. And 800, 900 students have said this to me year after year. It's monotonously, consistent. So please comment to me about that.
Sure.
Go ahead. No, I can go too.
One of my adages that I live by is you cannot change structural inequality or structural anything with goodwill. You have to make new structures with that thing at the core, whether it's equality or critical thinking. You have to restructure at the core. If I'm lecturing to students in a classroom, or if they believe that I'm the one that has the answers, why should they believe there's critical thinking? I'm not giving them the chance to think critically. I think it's a very, very different project. For example, if they're working in a group, not only thinking critically, but maybe doing something with that thought, maybe doing something that helps change their community. Maybe they're seeing the way they're thinking actually changes the community. So for example, one class I taught, I taught it with the former chancellor at CUNY, the Chancellor Bill Kelly, been president of the graduate school. I had just come to CUNY from another university. Students applied to be in the class. There were only 15, and they were all graduate students. The rules were 15 people. It was actually 16 people, 16 fields. They all had to be teaching. And their undergraduates that they were teaching out at the CUNY campuses, all over CUNY, would be giving feedback on their classes. The rule was, the class was called The Future of Learning. Come up with something in groups. Syllabus is blank. We just had calendars on the wall because no one can be critical and think smart when they have to think about when is midterm, et cetera, et cetera. They broke into groups and they came up with projects they would do in their classrooms. One of the class projects in Brooklyn, at Brooklyn College, was an art historian. Her students said, there are people in my family that are afraid to go to an art museum. They're immigrants. They see those lions and those things. They don't want to go to an art museum. I think our class project should be, as a final exam, to bring 5 students to the art museum who've never been to an art museum. Kahinda Wiley happened to have a show at that time. He's the foreigner that uses, 17th century heroic things. He's painting street people. Those students, it was a contemporary art class, learned contemporary art like crazy. And they put up posters all over Brooklyn in English, Spanish, Mandarin, Korean, Arabic, Hebrew, and gave up times where these students, undergraduates, would act as docents and take people through the museum. We were able to get the Brooklyn Museum to let people come free. I wish I could show you the photos. So many of the people who came through were the grandparents who were not documented and did not want to be in any photos. So of course we didn't take photos. Those were not cynical students. They learned how that art history class brought joy and knowledge and a sense of access and entrance to people who had never felt that before as immigrants. Almost everybody who came was an immigrant, right? It's a different kind of knowledge than telling people think critically, because it's a knowledge that if you're not telling them to think critically, they are seeing how their own way of thinking is changing whatever community or world they live in. Your students may be different than mine. I probably taught many, many, many more than 800 students also in my life. My students tend to be very, very optimistic about the world.
You think in terms of things like
We have a question. We have a question from online too. I think we want to probably get one from each.
Please.
So it comes from Jonathan Howell, who's an associate professor in linguistics, and he wants to follow up on ungrading, not upgrading, which is what autocorrect put in the text. So do you see ungrading as just a strategy for individual classrooms? Do grades still serve a useful purpose at the institutional level?
Sure. So, I mean, I think that the thing that we're advocating is to start with the classroom, right? That's kind of the ideal, is to start with the classroom and recognize that we can ungrade, give students more agency. For example, ask them to self-assess and do peer assessment, and teach them good practices for self-evaluation, peer evaluation. Only they can really know the best how they started and where they've come from and how they've progressed, and assess that. And they're very hard on themselves when you ask. And so even like guiding and mentoring them through being compassionate as well. That's the beginning, but also recognizing that institutionally, there needs to be a lot of work to change, because students depend on grades to get into medical school. Like, there are larger things afoot. And so it really, if we were to start with inciting a riot in our classrooms, and many of us were to do that, right? That's the aspiration, right? That's our hope for the new college classroom, would push for a new college, right? That we could actually transform higher ed by slowly doing this. And the movement is happening with ungrading. I see all kinds of reading groups and teaching circles on ungrading. A lot of people are reading Susan Bloom's collection on ungrading and are very curious about it and trying it out for the first time. And the fact that the whole world went online in 2 weeks in response to this enormous global pandemic, and that many went to, like, we've already transformed higher ed once. We've proven that we can do it. It's painful, but it's also necessary, I think, to prepare students for this fluctuating, changing, rapidly evolving world. It's a both and. I think we're going to be kicked out.
Yeah, I think we have 2 minutes.
I was going to ask, we don't have time for one more, right?
I'm gonna,
Blame us. That
No,
we
no,
got
no.
you into trouble.
I apologize again on behalf of New Jersey for the late start. I just want to share, first of course, there's a reception next door. Kathy and Christina will be there. Please come on over and talk and talk to each other. And if you feel like it, talk to me and talk to Leslie. Everyone always wants to talk to Leslie. So it's a good food. Thank you for coming. We're going to keep offering these things. We've got copies of the book that we've shared. We've got, some of you may not know, we actually have a humanities working group that we've put together of people who've been volunteered by their chairs. I don't think they've been voluntold. I think these are actually volunteers. But looking at ideas, various reports on revitalizing the humanities. We've shared this book with them. We've shared this book with the Strategic Review Committee that's led by Gabe. We're asking as a college for us to be reflecting on how we can do better on student success. Our provost, the new education, in his job application, our provost said the new education was his favorite book of all time. And so
I
we
hate
have,
him.
he's a very busy guy, but he wanted to try and make it here just to say hi to you on the way to something else. But so we have upper administration support to think creatively. And that's what we're going to be trying to do all this semester. Your chairs don't know it yet, but I'm turning our last chairs meeting in June into a day-long retreat to look at these master academic programming, planning, whatever it's called, MAP, action plans that we're talking about. So please try and incite a riot in your class. We've got great resources. If you want to see the book, we'll get books for you. Please embrace this as a way that we can try and be relevant. And I want to highlight one last thing that's so critical that I'm glad that you brought up. We are living in a world with a demographic cliff, with an explosion of alternative credentials, including I just learned YouTube is offering them now. In a country where a growing number of states are eliminating the requirement of a BA for all sorts of jobs. If we cannot answer the question for students, what am I doing here? What is it are we doing on a college campus that I can't get off of a TED Talk or a MOOC, which fortunately are dying, thankfully, or a YouTube university class? If we can't deliver something to them that they recognize, oh my gosh, this isn't like high school, and this is something I can't get anywhere else, then we will become irrelevant. And we've remained strong. We've remained a university of choice in this area, but we know that there are universities struggling and even dying all around us. So thank you for starting this conversation. I will keep pushing you folks and asking you to join me. I know there are a lot of really innovative teachers in this room, and we'd love to create fora for you to share that. So on that note, I'm giving up my popsicle stick. Thank you so much.